I'm either inside taking a nap or in my shop, which is in the back of the barn. And we come over and we do things. He says, you know, I'm gonna put together the West Shum Symposium again, but we're gonna do it in Slidell. I've been going to the Slidell Ham Fest and doing all that. And I said, well, that's great, man. Because we used to do it in Jonesboro, Tennessee, but the venue there just kind of collapsed on it, and he didn't have the support of the local ham community, and it was a shame because of the fact that it was really great. And I know a lot of people have gone to the one in Jonesboro, and it's really was first class. So this is the first one here, and we want you to spread the news because it really is important to do this. Now, is it important to get a Cosmophone 35 working?
Absolutely. Especially for the ones that want to sell it later.
Yeah, that's right. Well, when I'm gone, you're going to have to worry about that, Nick. But the issue is that you learn a lot. You think you know a lot about the hobby, but you really learn a lot about the thinking of other people when you study that. Now, the Cosmophone 35 is easy from the respect that you got Brian, who has been through these things many, many times. Next door to me is Nick, who went through it just recently. But you've got a schematic, you've got a manual, you've got all of these things together. Last night, as I was taking a shower and going to bed, I was thinking about, I was all excited about telling these folks about the TR8. There's nothing on it. There's not even a glimpse of what it was supposed to look like when it was finished. So I'm literally on my own. Ron, who gave the talk about the amplifiers yesterday, says you need to take each one of the cards out and photograph it, and then trace the circuits out and draw your own schematic. And I was looking at Ron. I said, Ron, I'm 75 years old. What am I going to be able to do? I said, no. It's just not. It's just not going to happen. But the fact is that you start it, you learn something about it. You learn something about it, and then that's the really important thing. Well, the last one on the list is a DX-Pedition planning guide. If you want to do that, I have been on several DX-Peditions. I was on the PJ2. In Curacao DX-Pedition when they became a new country. 4 of us went down there and had a good time for about a week. We were operating our own calls, PJ2/W5XU, and the other 3 were following that. And that was in 2011. In 2016, I went to South Georgia and South Sandwich Island, which was a rigorous DX-Pedition. I was gone 42 days. It had been a long time since I was gone from my bride. When I was in the service, I was gone long, but I wasn't having too much fun in that regard, but I did. And that was great. 2017, I went to Mellish Reef in the Coral Sea. That was a nice trip. That was probably my most enjoyable trip.
What was the call for South Sandwich?
VP8STI for Southern Thule Island, which was South Sandwich, and VP8SGI for South Georgia. Good. I personally made about 7,000 QSOs of that. The whole team made 134 or something like that. It was really well organized, well run. We had some issues, but they were out of control. We had some weather problems. And then in 17, I went to Mellish Reef. That was VK9MA. And then in the year later, in March of 17, I went to, was it 18? I thought it was 17. It might have been. At this stage of the game, Ted, it really doesn't make a whole lot of difference.
The days just come and go.
I went to 9M0W, Spratley Island. And I'm going to touch a little bit on each of those as we go along. But the whole idea is that before I get into the details of it, you really are considered to go somewhere. For example, many of you know IOTA, Islands on the Air. Well, there's a lot of islands around. In South Louisiana, there's an island called Grand Isle, not Grand Island, but Grand Isle. And it's a separate IOTA entity. And you can go down there, just get in your car and go down there and rent a little cabin for a weekend. And I've done that about 3 times. The issue with that is there's one ham that lives on Grand Isle. He's a technician. He works 10-meter sideband, period. That's it. So there's a lot of people who would like to get Grand Isle, Louisiana, IOTA 068, I think. And so you go down there and you do CW. He doesn't do CW, and they're like roaches in a cornmeal pile. I mean, it's all over the place. And it's fun. You ought to do that. And the bug will bite you. And then after that, I take no credit. So let's start. There's a great deal of research and planning that goes into every DX-Pedition. Much of it complexity varies according to where you're going, when are you planning on going, the number of people, the number of radios, the legal issues, the logistics to get there, back, the expenses. These are not free. The compatibility of the members and the goal of the team. So let's examine these one at a time. The where. Where you go opens up a lot of tasks. Licensing. Special licenses needed. For example, when we went to Curacao. Curacao is a SEP country. Being in the United States and Curacao, both are signers of the SEP, which basically gives you reciprocal licensing. We didn't have to deal with licensing. We were just PJ2/W5XU. That was our license. And we just had to have this form filled out that would show that, and it was licensed. In the forms, you just go to the ARRL site, tell them where you want to go, and they'll send you the form. Generally, the national ownership of the place will determine this. The countries where there is a weak government, that is something that you are going to have to determine for yourself. This could be an issue. A member SEP country is easy. Use your own call / the DX call. Most efforts, however, use the country's prefix. So if you want to go to a different place, sometimes you have to apply to get your license. For example, I'm licensed in the Falkland Islands. We spent some time because there's only one ride from the Falkland Islands to South America once a week. And because of the weather, we were delayed and we missed our flight, so we had to stay there about 5 days on the Falkland Islands. I mean, we were radio hams. There was just so much ice cream that you could eat in one day. For those of you who like ice cream, go 42 days without it. And anyway, you go into you walk off the Braveheart, and you're walking to your hotel, and you walk past the only grocery store that is in the Falkland Islands, and you say, there's a grocery store there. I'm going to duck into here, man. I know where you're going. I'm going to just duck into here. And you go right to the frozen food section, and you find the little carton of ice cream about this big, and you open it up. You remember when you were a kid? You would take the top, and you folded it and made a kind of a paper spoon out of it. Well, by the time I got to the cash register, I put the empty box on the thing, and I was there every day. The lady got a big kick out of that. You Americans are kind of nuts. Can you drive there, fly there? Do you need a ship? Do you need a boat? You need a helicopter? On the 2 occasions that people tried to go to Beauvais the last year or so, they had kind of a combination of all of that. Some of these places are difficult to get to. Some of them, when you get there, it's very difficult to get on the island. If inhabited, is the language going to be an issue? On ham radio, most people that talk on the radio speak some form, some basic English. So we're at a disadvantage when we go to their country and we're not dealing with hams, we're dealing with customs people, we're dealing with whatever. I mean, is that going to be a problem? You need to think about that. Bring some person that can translate. What about food, water, housing, power? Are they available locally? Can you go to the store and buy a Ben & Jerry's carton of ice cream? All this will need to be there. Are you going to bring it with you? South Sandwich, South Georgia, we brought everything with us, including our own sanitary facilities. What do you do with it after you've done your deed? In some islands, you have to put it in a bag and bring it back with you.
Leave no trace.
That's correct. This is a potentially big item. Big because you have to plan on it, you have to buy it, you have to store it, you have to bring it, and sometimes you have to bring it back. Is the location subject to local turmoil? Yes. Think about that. There's some tales that are circulating around about Somalia. The where continued. What about the weather? For the dates planned, you will need to adapt to the weather. South Sandwich went from a balmy 60 degrees down to about 18 overnight. Snowed every night. Did you have to bring winter clothes? Yes, you better have. Do you need a passport? Do you need an entry permit to go to the islands? Anywhere. Do you need inoculations, medicines, braces for your weak limbs? South Sandwich and South Georgia, I was the second oldest on the trip. All the other ones, I was the oldest. They called me as I was picking up a radio, "Do you need help with that?" And I would say, "Of course." Where are you going to go to sleep? You going to have tents? Is there housing there? Are you just going to roll a blanket out in the balmy sky and go to sleep amongst the stars? What about your meals, water, food, sanitary issues? Do you bring it back when you leave? What about bringing the local currency with you? Anywhere you go in Europe, euros would work. The Falkland Islands. British pounds? Oh no. Falkland Island pounds. It's different. Most of those places don't have ATMs. The when. What time of year will you be traveling and operating? Is it cold, rainy, hot, snow? Got to plan on that. The way we did it on South Sandwich, South Georgia, is I bought one of these duffel bags. That brought back some memories. Duffel bag, big fiberglass coated duffel bag, about this high, and I stuffed all of my clothes in there. The heavy jackets, the sweater, the flannel shirts, all of that. And I stuffed it in that, sent it to Paul in California, and he put everything on a big shipping container. Radios, antennas, coax, food, everything. It went into the shipping container, all 6 tons of it. And it was sent down to New Zealand, where the Braveheart picked it up, put it on the ship. Well, you need to consult the local weather data and past information. Well, there is no weather station on South Sandwich Island. Not even Google was able to query that. So you have to go somewhere else to figure it all out. And some of it just kind of makes sense. You're a couple of 100 miles off the Antarctic coast, it's not going to be balmy. Will the place, travel, means, and route depend upon the time of year? Are there some times of the year where it's just not accessible, period, just because of the fact that the weather's bad, too stormy, too snowy, too whatever? The number of people and the number of radios. This was an interesting one. Let's look at that for a minute. Let's do the radios first. The ideal situation is that in a 24-hour rotation, all open bands are serviced. That's a simple statement, right? If a band is open, you want a radio for that and somebody behind it. This does not mean that every mode, but ideally every band that is open to good propagation should have operators. It has to be balanced against many issues. For example, the number of operators that you're bringing might be restricted by the means that you go there. For example, the Braveheart can take a maximum of 14 people. We had 14, well, we had 13. We had a last-minute cancellation. So we had 14 people, max. When we went to Mellish Reef, it was only 9. And it was limited by the conveyance that we had to take. The Phoenix used for Mellish Reef had a maximum of 9. This will determine the maximum number of operators that you could bring with you. So, okay, you're doing, let's see, you carry the one, and you start doing this arithmetic. I was fussed at yesterday when I introduced math into my talks. The number of radios depend again on several factors. What is the number of radios that can be kept active on a 24-hour basis? Less means a reduction in QSOs. More might mean a radio is just not manned. Propagation of the days of operation are an important factor. When you can and when you have the information, propagation studies would work really well. Number of radios and people continued. Ideally, there would be people per radio ratio such that each operator in a 24-hour period gets to operate roughly half of the 24 operated. There is no real use of returning home rested. It's not a vacation. Work. VP8, STI, SGI had 10 hours per day per operator. And indeed, the shifts were 12 hours long. 7 operators per shift and 6 radios. So if somebody had to go take a leak somewhere, somebody could jump in. The extra guy was also putting together antennas because the antennas broke every day. We had to put them back together. Service the generators. We had 4 generators. VK9MA had 10 hours per operator, and this was broken up in 4 and 6 hour shifts. That worked fairly well. 9M0W on Spratly Island had 22 operators and 4 radios. Let me see me do that too. giving an average of 4.4 hours per day operation. Not good planning and a waste of many of the operators' time. You spend money traveling halfway across the world. I brought a K3, an expert 1.3K amplifier, a couple of 100 feet of coax, connectors. I brought 7 of Bob's headsets. So I looked like I was not only going to Spratly Island, but I was going to live there for 4 centuries. So it's kind of nice to be able to get a ratio of the numbers of radios and people to the point where, since you're going to operate, you have the facility and the ability to do so. Yes, Ted.
Why did they have so many operators?
All right, let's talk about that. And this is my projection, my estimation. When you have many operators, the cost of the operation is split by the number of operators. So it could be that the cost per operator cost was trying to be reduced as much as possible. That's one theory. I've heard and have several other theories. That's one reason. But if you're going to place XYZ for the purposes of operating ham radio so that you can contact people who may not have had the privilege of operating there. I mean, when we were on South Sandwich Island, that was number 3 in the world. So a lot of people didn't have that. They needed it. I'm guessing that's it, Ted. I can talk to you about that later. So again, South Sandwich Island, there's no use coming back rested. This was the day that you can see the little red mark right there. That was the last remaining tent. The day before, we had an 80-mile-an-hour snow blizzard that destroyed one of the tents. I had just gotten back working about 18 hours. Since I was old, I got a break. And got back on the ship, and we were bringing everything back on to pack up and go to South Georgia Island. We had one less tent. We had the 160-meter vertical looked like it had more splints on it than it had metal because it had broken in the wind. But there's no use coming back rested. Legal issues. Are you going to need a passport? Probably. The reason why is because you're going to have to go through various countries probably to get to where you're going. And it's recognized as a universal identification. It's likely that most destinations and way stops would require it. Are you going to have a fee for permission to operate? It's going to cost you any money just to set up a radio. Some islands, some places have that. What are the rules of living in the country and locale? I mean, can you scratch in public? What are the rules? I mean, what is it? Sensitivity to any indigenous wildlife? Probably. South Sandwich and South Georgia. South Sandwich Island is the home of 1.5 million penguins. Penguins never go to sleep. Penguins are very chatty. So there's a lot of noise and, oh, the smell. Any tasks required for the licensing authorities? I have a license to operate in the southern islands that are owned by the UK. My call is VP8RXU. couldn't get XU because they go by the list, down the list. So my call is VP8RXU. I can operate in any of the VP8s. So I had to go talk, and I had to show my passport, and I had to say, well, I got a mole right here in my leg, and you know, all that, and I got the license. And it's good for as long as I'm living. Mellish Reef had 1 million nesting birds on this little island. The island was maybe 1,000 feet long, maybe 30 feet wide. And the birds were everywhere. You literally had to watch where you were walking because you wouldn't want to step on a bird or step on an egg of a bird or anything else. They were blue-footed boobies. I'm not making this up. Blue-footed boobies, black-footed boobies, and black-footed boobies that didn't have black feet because they were pregnant. That's how you can tell. Anyway, so I was just walking from one place to another, had the camera in the pocket, and I stirred up this big nest and took the picture. We had to work around it. South Georgia Island. These are king penguins. They stand about this high. They're pretty tall. Most of them were about this big, called chin strap. They have a little black line going around their chin like that. And they were just noisy, noisy, noisy. Very territorial, too. If you got close to them, it was really something. On South Sandwich and South Georgia, we had to take the cables. Obviously, we had miles and miles of coax cables to connect the antennas. And when a penguin, I'm not trying to imitate one, but I'm just trying to give you the feeling. They would walk up to it, and they would see the wire. They knew it wasn't there before. And they knew they needed to get on the other end of the wire. They didn't know how to do it. So they basically just jumped over it.
That's really good.
Well, no, I don't think so. But I had practice. The logistics, how to get there and get back. Do you fly? Do you take a boat ride? Do you take a helicopter? I'm sure you all have read about the 2 past attempts to get to Beauvais Island. I mean, that is tough. But that's also the reason why it's number 2 on the list. It's just hard to get there. The first attempt, they decided to take a helicopter, which was probably a good decision since there's very little flat area where you can land. And when you land on this little rocky flat area of Beauvais, you still got this big cliff of a glacier to climb up to get to the top. How do you get all the stuff there needed to the location? You ship it separately, you bring it with you, you bring each a little. Spratly Island, we all brought a little, except I brought one of the 4 radios, one of the 4 amplifiers. I brought Bob Heil's headsets, I bought all of that. Food. Fuel, if needed, sanitary needs and arrangements. Can you bury your waste? Oddly enough, on South Sandwich and South Georgia, we were able to bury it. That's interesting. But it snowed every night.
And the ground was frozen?
And the ground was frozen. We had to take a pickaxe to it. And of course, you know, that far down below, what you get is volcanic activity. The South Sandwich Islands, or a group of islands, about 6 of them, that form a little arc. The last island, which is South Sandwich or Southern Thule Island, is the only one that has a flat surface on it. It's the only one. The other ones are all volcanic islands. As a matter of fact, while we were there, one of the islands' volcano exploded. We didn't see it, but I found out later, and I made the mistake of telling Paula about that. Cooking and eating. I mean, are you going to eat Cheerios every day, 3 times a day? Or are you going to cook something? What about warm meals? What about something that you're not going to emaciate the operators? What's going on? How do you store the supplies? South Sandwich in South Georgia, refrigeration was not a problem. Water is a big issue. Water is a big issue. In the 2 times that we took ships, the boat that we took generated its own water, reverse osmosis, and that's the water we drank. In some cases, it's advisable not to drink the water that's there. Water is the universal dissolver of things. And if you're not used to it, it could upset you. This was one of the 2 power plants on Mellish Reef. Note the type. They were chosen for the size and weight. They were 2 kW apiece, very lightweight, little Honda, small, silent, lightweight, inverter driven. Inverter driven. When we were there, I said, you know, I think I remember reading that QST article about inverter driven generators and the noise that they did. So I got the head of the DX-Pedition and I said, you know, when we get these generators, we might want to buy one regular old type of generator. So why you do it? So I'll send him the article. He said, okay. So we had 4 of these and we had 1 Chinese 4 kW, plain old rotating field type of alternator. And it was good because we couldn't use those on 160 and 80 meters. Too much noise. It sounded like somebody, like a heavy machine shop moved next door and all they were doing is constant welding. So it worked out well. No, they were not paralleled, although they can be paralleled. This tank is a common fuel tank for this and this. And they're, you know, they're a good generator otherwise, but not for 160 and some 80. I operated a lot of 80 meters there, and we had to worry. The 2 sites, the 2 camps were about 500 feet apart. So we couldn't have 160 and 80 going a lot, so we had to do a lot of changes. And we had pretty good antennas, so I think a lot of you guys might have worked us on Mellish Reef. That was a fun DX-Pedition. One of the benefits is that you got some beautiful scenery. Isn't that pretty? South Georgia Island. The next day we had a 100-mile-an-hour snowstorm that completely broke every antenna, flattened the only tent, ruined everything, parts and pieces that we brought there we never could find. We just packed up and went home. Of the 20 days that we were supposed to operate, we actually operated about 13 because of the weather. The expenses. I don't have to tell you that these things are not free. How much do you estimate that the whole trip will cost? Include transportation, not the personal transportation, because everybody's coming from different parts of the world, so that's a given that you yourself have to absorb. Supplies, expenses, radio accessories, food, fuel, tools. Some radio supplies lend radios for advertising. On VK9 and VP8, Ellicraft lent us the K3s. So we had K3 radios lent. At the end of the DX-Pedition, we returned them. They cleaned them up, serviced them, and sold them as used radios. I bought CW1 from the VP8 trip, and I have that one. it brings back nice memories when I sit down and use it. Members of the team pay all a part. Possibility of getting outside organizational financial help for DX groups and clubs. If so, there seems to be a tradition, and I'm speculating that the team pays half and the other half is solicited from donations. The VP8 STI SGI trip cost about $450,000. The primary cost was the Braveheart. That was the biggest expense. The aborted Beauvais Island trip was reported to be in the $750K range. That's a lot. That's a lot. QSL parameter. Will there be a cost for QSLs? Are you going to use Logbook of the World? Are you going to go to Club Log, where every QSL that you get is you got to pay for? Reimbursement procedures. Do clubs get first shot at the replies for the QSLs? All of those things have to be considered. Many a good idea has died at this stage simply because the effort planned is just too expensive. This is a very sobering exercise that has to be done for each trip, because you just don't want to do planning and do it poorly so that when you get there, did anybody bring tools? All I need is a screwdriver. Do we have enough gasoline to last the whole time? Mellish Reef, the ship that we took, ship is perhaps the wrong adjective. The boat that we took held 9 people plus the crew, but there was no room to put the fuel for the generators. So we had, well, these were international barrels, 42-gallon barrels. We had 4 of them, and they were dragged behind the boat with ropes on little skiffs, 2 of them, 2 barrels per boat. That's how we got the fuel there. Yes, I have pictures of that. Sometimes I have nightmares about that. But unless, let's see, past DX-Peditions become an issue, compatibility of the team members is desired, but unless you're familiar with everyone, this is hard to judge at the planning stages. Why is this important? What happens if you have a team of X amount of people, and one member of that team prefers to have tea time at 4 o'clock? Or, I can't eat that, I'm not going to eat that. Or, is this the only wine you have? Or, no, I forgot my cushion on the boat, I have to get that, I can't sit down in this chair and operate. You just have to be careful about that, because these are not what you would call comfortable circumstances. So you go through an interview by the phone or Skype or group meetings like this can help make the decision and give time before a potential disaster happens. On the trips that I've been, for the most part, this was not a problem. There were some personalities that perhaps were bruised at the end of the trip because, well, square pegs don't fit in round holes. Do team members have the same goals? Some say, well, I've never been to South Sandwich before. I'm going to take my camera and I'm going to be acting like a tourist and have my little Tommy Banana hat, and I'm going to just go about my business. Oh no, that ain't the way it works. Do they have the same skill set? Ooh. You sit down in front of the radio, the schedule on the blackboard says, okay, you have to do 17 meters CW. Well, I don't do CW. You got a mic handy? I'll do sideband. We had one that did just RTTY, and we knew that. He could not do voice, could not do CW. It was RTTY, and we knew that. So it was easy to plan around. So that information needs to be known. Any team ever have moral, medical, or other reasons why special conditions permit? I can tell you that on the trips that I've been on, and I'm not what you would call a seasoned traveler, but on the trips that I'm on, we had to make sure that we were medically equipped to do that. The VPA trip had 2 doctors on it, 2 emergency room doctors. The Mellish Reef team, very enjoyable trip, great bunch to be with. It was a good trip. I liked that one. The goal of the team. What's the official goal of the team and the expectations of the team members? Is it the number of QSOs? Is to give people a new IOTA, a new country? What's the stated goal? The most obvious one is, if you're in a rare location, is to give as many operators a chance to operate that rare location. Is it the prime reason to operate, or for science gathering, vacation? I mention that because there have been several DX-Peditions that part of the team did not operate, but they gathered samples of local vegetation, soil samples, things like that for scientific purposes. It was okay. Everybody knew that. Everybody could plan on that. But what happens if you get a guy, didn't happen to us, to me, what happens if you got a guy that says, well, you know, can you take my shift? I just want to walk around the island a little bit and take some samples. I brought me a box of Ziploc bags, and I like to take some samples of the bird feathers and the vegetation and bring it back with me so I can do some research on that. You better know about that beforehand.
Question.
Yes.
What's your feeling on the operators who want to work you on every band, every mode, which then will limit the people that can really get a QSO?
Rob, that's a good question. And it varies depending upon the philosophy of the team. For example, VP8, STI, SGI, because of the fact that we were not able to operate the number of days that we wanted, we basically answered every call that we wanted to answer, whether it was a duplicate or not. We were using N1MM, so you could type in, and before you finished the call, you could figure out whether or not it was a dupe. So we decided as a group to work the duplications. Now, the caveat to that is that we were easy meat for Southern Europe, the Italians and the Spanish, and it was very, very difficult to operate at any point, any time of the day, without them constantly calling you, I'll give you an example. Dallas, why are you laughing? This is Italy, Zulu number 8, the sugar or whatever his call was. I am calling you VP8, the sugar, Tango, Italy. I know you can hear me. So you hear that a couple of times and you just, you got the big knob in the middle, you just turn it, right? And he follows you. This is Italy, Zulu. I am calling you again. I know you can hear me. So you're talking. Italy, Zulu 8, VP8, STI 59. Oh, very good to talk to you. My name is Roberto. And I'm in sunny Italy. I'm running 1,000,000 watts. And it's nice to talk to you. Very good, Roberto, 5'9". Thank you. Listening 5 up. He follows you. What is your name, please? So, Rob, you have to kind of work with the conditions. Oh, Lord, I was hoping.
Some of them done it, if you hadn't ever worked at whatever, that you got priority, that you would, the other guys who worked you 9 times already couldn't call.
Well, you would think, and this thinking is incorrect, but you would think that if you worked this entity on 20 meters CW, that your goal would be not to repeat that contact, but to try to do it on another band or another mode or whatever. But that's not the case. They will work you just because they are there. And I don't know. I mean, I don't have what you would call a big gun station, but when I work somebody and I feel confident that I have worked somebody and put them in the log, I mean, I scratch that one off the list and try another band or another mode or something like that. But it's not, that's not universal. It's not universal. Now, the total number of duplicate contacts, I don't have any idea. I mean, I didn't keep those records. But we certainly were busy operating. There was one operator on VP8, DL9 KVA. His name was, I'm not quite sure. Excellent CW operator. When you're using N1MM, you can look at the screen, look over their shoulder, and it can tell you the rate of your QSOs. He was operating at about 240 QSOs an hour. That is scorching speed. I mean, I'm plodding along, you know, plodding along, and I was doing about 160. I don't send it 1,000,000 words a minute. So it's amazing. And that usually is not a problem. If you're being productive on a band, then your job is to stay on that band, that mode, and do the best you can for the shift that you have. Sometimes, when the shifts are over with, you get the tap on the shoulder, and you get up, and they sit down and just take over right there and there. Sometimes they change bands because that band might have petered out, or that IZ8 is still there. I know you can hear me. So you just, I mean, you use the big knob a lot. Okay. So in summary, any adventure needs to be well thought out. It may not be good to simply state, well, yeah, that might be a good place to visit. I think I'll try that. DX-Peditions are hard work. It's not a restful time generally, and there's always something to do even when you're not operating. VP8, we had to repair the antennas every day. There's a need to continual generator service if you go that route. You got to take care of those generators. You change the oil at the appointing time. You do this, you do that, you do that. Why? If you lose a generator, you've lost that much in radio. It's most unusual to have world connectivity for email and telephones unless satellite phones are it. So if you want to be able to call back home during your off time, that ain't going to happen. On any of the trips that I was there, I never was able to do that. But is it worth it? Yes, it's worth it. When I got back from VP8, I had lost 35 pounds. That's not. Well, that's The check's in the mail. You're right about that. You're right about that. But for me personally, it's generated a lot of memories. And a lot of memories are renewed when I share them like this. Any questions? Yes.
Have the antennas been re-engineered since they break so often to make them a little stronger?
On the VP8 trip, we were using Roan push-up masts, galvanized steel masts. At the end of the trip, and one of the primary reasons why we had to leave early is because the storms just simply broke those in half. Didn't just bend them, broke them. And when we went to 9M0, Spratly Island, we used a push-up mast made by EA out of Spain, a much, much more robust telescoping mast made out of aluminum. And they were very, very good. In the case of some of the antennas, I mean, the wind just beat them up. The 160-meter antenna, we repaired at least once a day. We had a 40-meter four-square. Sometimes we would wake up and it was a 40-meter on-the-ground square. We had to pick them up and put them back and take wood dowels and do all kinds of things to do it. But it was planned that way. I mean, we have aluminum strips that when an antenna broke, we could make a splice with clamps and put the antenna back. So how can you plan for that? I'm not quite sure you could plan for it. Of all of the trips that I've been on, not many, but for the ones that I have, the only time we ever used a wire antenna was on the PJ2 trip. But we didn't have the wind and the conditions and the heavy rain and things like that, snow. Now, are there antennas that are made for that kind of grueling duty? Probably not. I mean, when you buy a store-bought antenna, it's not really designed for 100-mile-an-hour winds. Yes, Rob?
Seems like for Bouvet, which obviously didn't happen, that they were going to use these 90-foot tilt-up for 160. Am I remembering that right?
Yes.
I thought at the time, this is insane. That, okay, that whoever was the guru for 160, like, we've got to be 90 feet tall, but you got to look at the practicality of it, and I can't imagine keeping something like that up. So, like, who makes those decisions?
Well, on that particular trip, I don't know. But it is naive to think that all people are sane. For example, on the Peter I trip, which was, 20 years ago, the first one, they didn't put up a tall antenna for 80 meters. They simply made a 2-element beam laid on the rocks, on the snow. And it worked very well. Of course, down there, everything was north, so there was no big deal with that. So, I mean, it's just a matter of planning on that. If you're planning on putting an antenna that big, you need to plan on how to get it up and hold it there. And that's probably what's not done. Of course, they never had the actual opportunity to be able to do it.
I mean, they tested them on nice weather in Michigan or something, Ohio, whatever.
Yep.
But so what?
The loading coils on the 160 that we had at VP8, the coil was that high, that big around. And that was a 120-foot antenna. Yes, Dallas?
What's next?
Oh. Your check is in the mail. The next trip I'm going to is Market Reef. Market Reef is a small chunk of rock between Sweden and Finland. It's for the 50th anniversary of Market Reef becoming a separate entity. On the right, you see there's a lighthouse. The middle building is where the lighthouse keeper was. The other building was the maintenance building. We will be in the middle building. We are going to be the third team of a 3-team approach to celebrate that 50th anniversary. It's going to be 4 operators, 2 radios. 1 operator is from Japan, 1 from the Philippines, 1 from South Korea, and me. I'm the token American. I knew the guy from Japan. He was on the VPA trip, and first class young man. Great guy, great CW operator. That's my next trip. I leave in 3 weeks.
Go. That would have power.
Power, Richard, is going to be a problem. The generator that was there powering the lighthouse is broken right now. They have a solar panels, battery backup, inverter that in the best of times will deliver 2 kW worth of power. So we're going to have 1 radio that will be a K3 with a 1 kW amplifier. The radio that I'm bringing is a Ten-Tech Eagle with a 500 watt amplifier. And when you look at the input current of that, key down, we are just over 2 kW. So that is something that the team has decided that it's workable. You just turn the knob down a little bit more to the left until the lights start to blink. We'll see how it works. It's a short trip. I'll be in and out in 10 days. But that's where I'll be. Yes, Dave. There's no grocery store. There's no grocery store. We're going to be, I fly to Helsinki, then there to Åland Island, and then, or Åland Island, and then from there we take a boat to Market Reef. Yes, David?
2 radios, 4 operators. How many frequencies?
Anyone that's open. Now there are teams on that reef right now. I have worked them on 30 meters and 40 meters. And they've had decent signals. I have heard them on 17 and 20. The antennas, if you look carefully, right up there, some antennas are already there. The teams before us will have already erected wire antennas for the other bands. So we anticipate that we will not have any heavy antenna work to do. Just getting on the reef and then hoping that there's no storms, and then setting up the radios will be our biggest chore. The group that's putting all this together will also be the ones who will act as our hosts, and they will provide the food and the water for us, so we don't have to bring that. So of all the ones that I've been on, that's going to be kind of a gentleman's DX-Pedition.
You bring a spare radio?
There will be a radio that will be available, but the 4 people are not bringing a spare. I mean, I'm bringing a 70-pound champion case with all my stuff in it. And June, the Japanese fellow, who lives in Austria, by the way, he's bringing his K3 and an amplifier. So that's where I'll be. Answer your question, Dallas?
No. What's next after Market Reef?
Is he your shell?
No, that was his question. I didn't pay him to ask that one. I don't know. I have my fingers in some pies. The way you do this is you find out about the DX-Pedition, you find out who the leaders are, and you simply send them an email. Most of the time, they're cordially answered. Team has already been established. Thank you very much. But at this time right now, we have to tell you no. Sometimes, like in the VP8 trip, they call you up. We've had a cancellation. Do you still want to go? So that's how it works. Now, Bob Alphin, everybody knows who Bob Alphin is, K4UEE, he suggested that I produce a ham radio resume, which I did. And as I introduce myself, I include this ham radio resume and the past experience that I have had. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But very, very rarely have I been on a trip that I was part of the original team planned to go on the trip. I mean, these trips take years to put together. VP8 took almost 3 years to put together. And, you know, in 3 years, stuff happens. And so you just have to be patient and wait. But after this one, I have no idea where I'll be.
You imply that there are groups doing this all the time, planning?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little about those groups?
No, not really, because I'm not really part of that circle. But for example, number one is North Korea. I would be willing to bet that there are groups who are trying to get permission to do North Korea. I doubt very seriously whether there'll be any Americans on that, but there could be Chinese, and the Chinese could certainly mount a creditable effort in North Korea. They're right next door, so that could be a possibility. There's a little place in the South China Sea off the coast of the Philippines called Scarborough Reef. You ever hear that? Scarborough Reef is the entity that shouldn't be. If you look at the photographs of the last team that went there, Scarborough Reef is basically a series of outcroppings, of which most of it is underwater at high tide. And one of the team members that they had to have was a team member that was skilled in carpentry. They could use 2x4s to create a platform to put an antenna and an umbrella and a radio and a generator. That's how Scarborough Reef was activated. That reef right now has been taken over by the Chinese, who are building a naval base, blowing up the reef, creating debris, bringing it up and dredging it and making an island and making a military base out of that. That whole South China Sea,
That's all disputed, isn't it?
it's all
China says
disputed.
we own it,
It's
Japan
very,
says, no, we own it.
well, it's very disputed. Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, the Chinese, all are taking pot shots at those islands, and it's almost first come, first serve. Although there are treaties, and everybody just kind of, through intimidation or otherwise, just don't pay attention to that. So Scarborough Reef might end up by being activated one day when the Chinese are finished doing it.
Do you have any rumors on that? Any group?
Of Scarborough Reef, the only rumor I've ever heard was that it's probably going to be disallowed as an entity.
Okay, that works too.
I was in charge of tables and chairs for our ham fest in Baton Rouge for many years. So I woke up one morning early. Scarborough Reef was on 20-meter sideband. So I tried it, and I didn't get him. I said, it's not a problem. He's got a great signal. I'll get him tonight. Mhm. That day, they were run off the island by the Chinese. I missed him. I need 3 more, and I got them all. Scarborough Reef is one of them. So, any other questions?
Yeah, you didn't contact him right. You should have said, I know you can hear me.
I know you can hear me. Very good. You have a fine signal here. What is your name? Thank you very much.